The 1970s weren't all disco balls and bell-bottoms. Gas lines stretched for miles, mortgage rates hit 18%, and inflation ate paychecks alive. But how did families survive this chaos? And what shocking secret from that decade could save us today? Gas lines stretched for miles. But why were Americans suddenly rationing fuel like it was wartime again? Picture this. It's a frosty November morning in 1973. Radios buzz with disco beats, but outside, America looks like a war zone. Drivers sit in endless gas lines, some stretching 3, 4, even 5 miles long. Horns blare, tempers flare, and in New Jersey alone, police reported fights breaking out almost daily at gas stations. But here's the question. Why was the richest country in the world rationing fuel like it was 1942 again? The answer starts in the Middle East. In October 1973, the Yom Kippur War broke out, and in response to U.S. support for Israel, the Organization of Arab Petroleum Exporting Countries, OAPEC, dropped a hammer, an oil embargo. Overnight, America's cheap gasoline culture collapsed. Imports dropped by 7%, but prices spiked by a shocking 400% between 1973 and 1974. Suddenly, what cost 38 cents a gallon in 1972 shot to over $1 by 1974. Doesn't sound like much today? Adjusted for inflation, it's like gas leaping from $3 to over $12 a gallon within a year. And this wasn't just about price. It was about access. President Nixon introduced rationing by license plate number. Odd plates one day, even the next. Some states banned Sunday sales altogether. A survey in January 1974 found that 1 in 5 Americans couldn't fill their tanks at all that week. People siphoned gas at night, stole fuel from parked cars, and carried spare cans in trunks like lifelines. What's chilling is how quickly abundance turned to panic. In 1972, Americans drove carefree. Detroit's muscle cars guzzled gas like water. By 1974, those same cars sat parked while families dusted off bicycles. One California man even rode his horse 14 miles to work. Imagine that. But fuel shortages were only the first domino. When gas vanished, what disappeared next? From dinner tables? When meat vanished from dinner tables, how did families stretch casseroles, coupons, and gardens into survival? Close your eyes and picture this. It's 1974. The Bee Gees play on the radio, but your plate is bare. Meat prices just jumped 25% in a single year. Families stood in grocery aisles staring at empty butcher counters. Some stores rationed hamburger to 2 pounds per family, and steak became so expensive that the average worker earning $150 a week simply couldn't afford it. So how did people eat? They stretched. Casseroles became survival tools. 1 pound of ground beef padded with breadcrumbs, oatmeal, or even powdered milk to feed a family of 5. A USDA survey in 1975 found that over 60% of American households reported eating meatless dinners at least twice a week, not for health, but because they had no choice. Coupons turned into weapons. Housewives clipped every cent of savings from Sunday newspapers. Supermarkets even printed double and triple coupon days just to keep angry shoppers from revolting. Still, in March 1973, shoppers in Denver rioted after a chain grocer raised beef prices overnight. Police had to be called in to break up fights between mothers throwing punches over chicken legs. Victory gardens made a comeback. By 1977, more than 18 million American households planted backyard gardens, producing nearly $6 billion worth of vegetables in today's dollars. Tomatoes, beans, zucchini, these weren't hobbies. They were lifelines. Children weeded rows of corn. Grandparents canned jars of peaches, and whole neighborhoods swapped extra produce like trading cards. And here's a wild twist. While Americans were tightening belts, fast food chains like McDonald's quietly exploded. Why? Because for $1, you could still get a full meal. By 1976, McDonald's sales hit $1 billion annually, a 10 times jump from a decade earlier. Families gave up steak dinners, but they could afford burgers in paper wrappers. But food wasn't the only thing reshaped by inflation. If music was the soul of the 70s, why did disco and protest songs become the soundtrack to economic despair? Stagflation hit wallets and radios. So what did disco and protest songs have to do with economic despair? Imagine standing in a gas line in 1979, radio blasting Donna Summer's Hot Stuff from a cracked car speaker. You've been waiting 2 hours for 5 gallons of gas. Inflation is eating your paycheck. Unemployment is rising. And yet, disco is thundering through America. Strange, right? But music became the soundtrack of a nation barely holding it together. The 1970s economy was defined by a nightmare word, stagflation. Prices soared while jobs dried up. Inflation peaked at 13.5% in 1980, while unemployment sat above 7%. That toxic mix crushed families. Bread that cost 25 cents in 1970 shot up to 36 cents a gallon in 1972 to over $1.25 by 1980, a 250% increase. Imagine your weekly budget tripling overnight. But Americans didn't just suffer, they sang. Protest songs carried over from the 1960s. Country star Merle Haggard wrote, "If We Make It Through December," in 1973, a ballad about layoffs and poverty. It hit #1 during Christmas, when millions of families truly couldn't afford gifts. At the same time, disco exploded. Clubs like Studio 54 in New York became temples of escape. For $5 at the door, you could forget mortgage rates at 18%, drown in strobe lights, and dance until sunrise. Psychologists later argued disco's repetitive beats and excess mirrored a culture desperate to forget empty wallets and foreclosure notices. So here's the paradox. While stagflation made Americans poorer, it also gave them a cultural escape hatch. Music wasn't background, it was survival. And every beat carried a deeper question. If sound could distract, what did people wear when clothing itself became too expensive to buy new? If clothes cost more than paychecks, why did polyester, thrift shops, and patches turn into symbols of pride? Picture this. It's 1977. Inflation is ripping through every paycheck. A man's suit now costs over $100, nearly a full week's wages for the average worker making $150. Jeans, nearly $20. When beef was $1.50 a pound and gas ate half your wallet, new clothes felt impossible. Families had to choose groceries or garments. So what happened? People adapted. Polyester, that shiny, wrinkle-free fabric, exploded in popularity. Why? It was cheap, durable, and easy to wash. By 1975, over 6 billion yards of polyester were produced worldwide, flooding closets with disco shirts, stretchy pants, and leisure suits. Polyester wasn't just a style, it was survival fashion. But many families didn't buy new at all. thrift shops became lifelines. Between 1970 and 1980, secondhand clothing sales in America doubled. Goodwill and Salvation Army stores saw record traffic as middle-class families, not just the poor, began combing racks for bargains. Wearing patched jeans wasn't shameful anymore. It became a badge of resourcefulness. Kids ironed on colorful patches, not just to cover holes, but as fashion statements. Parents hemmed and re-hemmed skirts, turned dad's worn-out shirts into aprons, and even swapped clothes at neighborhood exchanges. Some women even unraveled old sweaters to reuse the yarn, a Depression-era trick reborn in the inflation crisis. And here's the twist. This thrift-driven style influenced culture itself. Punk fashion, with its ripped shirts and safety pins, wasn't just rebellion. It was born from economic necessity. Suddenly, what was once a sign of poverty became a symbol of cool. But if families patched up clothes and made polyester chic, how did they handle something even harder to fix? Homes, when mortgage rates hit the stratosphere? Mortgages soared to 18%. So how did families cling to homes while avocado kitchens and waterbeds filled magazines? Imagine walking into a bank in 1981 and asking for a mortgage. The clerk smiles politely and says, "That'll be 18% interest." Yes, 18. To put that in perspective, a $60,000 house, the median U.S. price in 1979, suddenly cost families an extra $900 a month in interest alone. That's more than many people's entire monthly salary back then. But here's the paradox. While ordinary families struggled just to keep roofs over their heads, glossy magazines were still advertising avocado green kitchens, shag carpets, and waterbeds as if everyone lived in luxury. It was the cruelest split screen. American Dream decor on one page, foreclosure notices on the next. So how did people hang on? Many didn't. Foreclosures spiked, and renters were crammed 2 or 3 families deep into single homes. In Chicago, housing reports noted entire blocks where garages were converted into bedrooms. Couples with young kids often bunked with parents, reviving multi-generational households not out of choice, but survival. Those who managed to keep houses alive did it through grit and side hustles. People took in boarders, rented basements, or bartered repairs for rent reductions. Some refinanced through new government programs, like the FHA, Federal Housing Administration, while veterans leaned hard on the GI Bill to secure subsidized loans. And let's not forget inflation's strange perk. Wages, though tight, rose just enough that people with fixed-rate mortgages actually saw their payments shrink in real value over time. But for new buyers, it was financial quicksand. Here's the kicker. Even as people patched walls and skipped meals to keep up with housing costs, Better Homes and Gardens was selling the dream of modern living, avocado fridges and sunken living rooms. It was a fantasy few could afford, but many chased anyway. But if homes were this hard to keep, who actually managed the day-to-day battle of survival? That leads us straight into the kitchens and checkbooks, where women quietly became the generals of America's economic survival. Women ran the checkbooks. So how did housewives turn into financial generals of America's survival? Picture this. It's 1974. Gas lines snake around blocks. Groceries cost double what they did 5 years earlier. And mortgage rates are climbing toward the sky. In most households, men brought in paychecks, but women decided where every penny landed. By the mid-1970s, over 70% of married women kept the family budget. They weren't just stretching dollars, they were commanders in what historians call kitchen table economics. Women rationed gas coupons, clipped grocery ads, and kept price books, notebooks comparing the cost of bread, milk, and meat across different stores. And here's the shocking part. These books weren't just for frugality. They became survival manuals. A loaf of bread cost 29 cents in 1970, but jumped to nearly 55 cents by 1975. A pound of round steak from $1.04 to $1.88 in the same stretch. Housewives fought inflation with math, memory, and grit. Many started home gardens, reviving the wartime victory garden tradition. By 1975, surveys estimated that 1 in 4 American families grew vegetables to offset soaring food, where neighbors pooled money to buy flour or meat in bulk, splitting it at kitchen tables. But women weren't just managing the household. They were entering the workforce in record numbers. In 1970, about 43% of women worked outside the home. By the end of the decade, it was nearly 52%. That change wasn't just cultural, it was economic necessity. Extra wages kept families afloat, even if women still handled most of the budgeting. Here's the twist. Even as women became economic lifelines, media still called them housewives. Magazines filled with avocado kitchens and recipes glossed over the real story. That women were generals of survival in America's household war against inflation. And if women ruled the checkbooks, what happened when the money simply wasn't enough? That's where secret economies began to bloom, hidden just beneath the surface. Behind closed doors when money failed, why did black markets, flea sales, and hustles become the secret economy? Picture a family in 1978. The paycheck comes Friday, but by Wednesday, the envelopes are empty. Rent isn't paid, gas is rationed, and the price of meat has doubled since last year. What do? For many Americans, the answer was simple. You hustled. Inflation averaged 7.1% through the 1970s, peaking at 13.3% in 1979. Official wages couldn't keep up, so the shadow economy filled the gap. Flea markets exploded. By 1975, there were an estimated 10,000 active flea markets across the U.S., double the number from the early 1960s. Families sold old clothes, records, tools, and toys not just for pocket money, but to put food on the table. Then came the barter boom. Eggs traded for haircuts. Car repairs swapped for homemade quilts. One Detroit mother recalled in an oral history, "We traded my husband's carpentry for pork chops. Otherwise, we wouldn't have eaten meat for a month." Black markets also thrived, especially for gas. With long lines and ration coupons in 1973 to 74, entire neighborhoods quietly sold extra gallons from cans in garages. Historians estimate that in some cities, 10 to 15% of gasoline transactions were off the books. And it wasn't just gas. Electronics, imported whiskey, even nylon stockings found new life in under-the-table deals. Meanwhile, teenagers turned into breadwinners in unusual ways. Shoe shines for $1, street bands passing the hat. Babysitting money quietly became grocery money. One 15-year-old in Ohio made more reselling cigarettes at school than her father earned in a week at the factory. Here's the paradox. While Washington preached thrift, Main Street built its own underground survival plan. By the end of the decade, the line between legal hustle and black market deal blurred for millions of Americans. But if shadow economies helped families survive, what larger lesson did the 1970s leave behind when inflation finally broke? After all this chaos, what hidden lessons from the 1970s could save us if inflation roared back today? The 1970s weren't just polyester suits and disco balls. They were financial boot camps. And every family learned survival lessons we've mostly forgotten. The question is, could we relearn them if prices spiraled again? Start with the raw numbers. Inflation averaged 7.25% from 1973 to 1981, the highest sustained rate in U.S. history outside wartime. Mortgage rates climbed to a crushing 18.6% in 1981, and unemployment touched 8.5%. By then, nearly half of Americans admitted they had changed their diets. Cheaper cuts of meat, more casseroles, and garden-grown vegetables instead of supermarket staples. Lesson 1: Self-reliance. Victory gardens weren't just wow nostalgia. By 1975, an estimated 20 million households planted gardens again to offset grocery bills. Families also rediscovered canning, freezing, and coupon clipping as daily rituals. Lesson 2: Shared sacrifice. In surveys, over 60% of households said they cut driving to save gas during the oil crisis. Carpooling wasn't uncool. It was patriotic. Even celebrities like Paul Newman promoted thrift and simplicity. Lesson 3: Side hustles. Before Uber, before eBay, the 1970s saw babysitting, flea markets, odd jobs, and even black market trading surge. It wasn't glamorous, it was survival. And the most haunting lesson: inflation doesn't break everyone equally. Wealthy families shifted into gold, real estate, and collectibles, safe havens that gained value. But working-class Americans lost buying power year after year, until many gave up on traditional savings altogether. So here's the challenge. If tomorrow's groceries cost 50% more, if gas lines returned, if savings evaporated, would we bend or would we break? Because the 1970s proved one thing: resilience isn't about comfort, it's about adaptation. And those who adapted fastest, they didn't just survive. They thrived in a world everyone else proved survival isn't about money. It's about grit, creativity, and community. If you want more forgotten survival stories that still matter today, make sure you watch the next video. History has the answers. We just have to listen.